finally out. Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has resigned after mass protests. But is that enough for them? Can there be a peaceful and democratic transition in Algeria? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Algeria's army had warned there is no more room to waste time. And now it is standing with Algerians, with ailing President Abdelaziz Bouteflika forced to resign, ending 20 years of his rule. The Constitutional Council has officially declared the presidential post vacant. But who will replace Algeria's longest-serving president? The Constitution says the Speaker of Parliament should be interim leader until elections are held. But protesters are worried how long the transition will last and say they want an overhaul of the whole political system. Rob Matheson reports.
Hours after President Abdelaziz Bouteflika had his 20 years in power ended, the search for Algeria's new leader has begun. The Constitution says this man, Abdelkader Ben Salah, the Speaker of the Parliament, is eligible to be caretaker president for up to 90 days, during which an election for a new president is expected. Some critics say the people won't accept Ben Salah as a temporary leader because he's a long-time Bouteflika ally.
The slogans were very clear. They were calling for the departure of Ben Saleh as well. So the Algerians don't want the transition to be led by any member who was close to the Bouteflika clan and to Bouteflika himself. So I don't think that they will be ready to accept Ben Saleh.
Protests turned to celebrations at the news of Bouteflika's resignation. Weeks of demonstrations, as well as growing pressure on him to step down from the head of the army and other commanders who once supported him, forced the 82-year-old to reverse his announcement to stand for a fifth term as president. Bouteflika's made few public appearances since suffering a stroke 6 years ago. His critics say he's been a frontman for military and business leaders who really run the country. Protesters are demanding they also need to go in a clean sweep among the ruling elite. But some say the military has a crucial role in the political leadership.
I
am happy, and my congratulations to the great people of Algeria and the National Popular Army. The people took to the streets in their millions, and the army took the side of the people. This has led the president to resign.
Some Algerians celebrated all night, not just in the capital Algiers, but other cities too. In the light of day, they'll be wondering how many of the now former president's allies will remain in power. Rob Matheson, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's bring in our guests now to talk more about this. Amel Boubekeur is a research fellow at the Paris-based School for Advanced Studies in Social Sciences, and she joins us via Skype now from Algiers. And you saw her just a moment ago in Rob's report. Dalia Ghanem is a resident scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Centre, and she joins us from Beirut. And from London, we have Algerian journalist Jamaluddin Talib. Welcome, all of you. So, Amel, let me start with you. What do you make of the announcement on Tuesday night that Mr. Bouteflika would, in fact, resign immediately, and we are now already in the post-Bouteflika era?
Well, indeed, I believe that not diminishing the role of the army, which has forced Bouteflika to leave, it's the sign that protests and popular demonstrations are really a successful tool for political negotiation. We are not in a revolutionary situation where these protests have been used in order to make a rupture with every kind of institutions and with a dictator that the people won't have nothing to do with. Why am I talking about the tool of negotiation? The protesters didn't want, for example, to target symbols such as the presidential palace, symbols of the regime. They just state or they just continued and to use these demonstrations in order to put their demands forward. Now, the protest has the power of balance still needs to be built. I mean, the power of balance is clearly in favor of the army and of the remaining people of the regime in power, but using, as I may have heard it in some international media or even within the ranks of the regime, using the idea that the protest should end now because Bouteflika has left, it's just an insult to the demands of political participation. I mean, it's not because the protests will calm down that the situation will be back to normal. So the importance of this protest, really, people in Algeria are very proud of themselves. They really feel that this is because of their protest that they have been able to reach this situation and this result. But of course, a lot of questions remain, and especially even if protests have been efficient until now, the system won't purge itself by itself. So there's also a sense that they definitely need new tools to do so.
Dalia Ghanem, if we just take a step back for a moment and look at what happened in the last couple of days before this. We had Mr. Bouteflika's office saying on Monday that the president would step down at the end of April, and he would take what were called important steps to ensure the continuity of the leadership in the country, and that fueled fears that the people around him were trying to cement their hold on power. Then we had Lieutenant General Salah announcing that they would activate this procedure in the constitution to remove the sitting president. Was that the army essentially making a preemptive move here to keep their position of power? And how are protesters in the streets going to interpret that?
Well, I think that, first of all, we have to say that the cacophony that happened during all these weeks showed that the movement, this peaceful and very civic movement, took the regime off guard. The Algerian regime wasn't expecting such a scale of mobilization. And I think this is a big victory for the Algerian people. But again, there is so much that they still have to achieve. I think the declaration of Gaid Saleh, especially the last one, was very threatening. And I believe that President Bouteflika had no choice then to resign. Concerning the military, it is very important to point out something. There is the role that the military has been playing in Algeria politics since the independence and the country until today. And I can state today and yesterday we saw it again with the declaration of Chief of Staff Gaid Saleh that the military are still the locus of power in Algeria. They are not governing, but they are ruling. As actually historian Mohammed Harbi stated once rightly, he said all states in the world have an army, and in Algeria the army has a state, and I think this is still true today. And the Algerians are a bit scared of that because while they recognize the positive role that the military has been playing, they don't want Gaid Saleh to become what Sisi became in Egypt. So they want also the military to step back and to come back to their barracks, and they don't want Gaid Saleh. As a matter of fact, when I marched with Algerians on March 22nd and on March 29th, their slogans were very clear. They chanted "روح روح يا بوتفليقة ودي معاك Gaid Saleh," which means go Bouteflika and take with you Gaid Saleh.
Jamal ad-Din Talib, what's your view on this and the army's position here? Because if they are trying to paint themselves as the kind of the guardian of the people in this, but also trying to preserve their own power, how long is that position going to last? The longer they continue to be seen as pulling the strings, and as Delia says, not going back to their barracks?
Well, the Algerians, they sent a clear message. They don't want the Egyptian scenario. They give even an opportunity to the army for why not a Portuguese or a Spanish scenario. The army helped Algeria like it did in Portugal in democratic transition, democratic, smoothly, with the help of the Algerians. Algerians are vowing, they know they won a great battle, and there are scenes of jubilation, but there is also caution that they don't trust the army. They welcome that Gaid Saleh mainly was siding with Bouteflika. At the end, he sided with the Algerians to win this battle, but there is suspicions, caution, and they don't want to give all the confidence to Gaid Saleh. There are even calls for Gaid Saleh to give another opportunity to Algeria and the Algerians to appoint maybe a successor, a younger successor in the army to help Algeria to open a new chapter in its history. Algeria made history with a big war of liberation, a big revolution for liberation. Gaid Saleh can gain a lot of esteem. Even history will mark him if he helps Algeria and the army to make the new revolution, the democratic revolution. Maybe it will have even impacts and the repercussions in the Arab world clouded with many dictators and with many aparchiks and many oligarchs.
Jamal, you said earlier that Algerians don't want the Egyptian scenario. Just explain what you mean by that.
They don't want a Sisi, new Sisi. Like what happened in Egypt, the army sacrificed Mubarak, and then what happened? At the end, Sisi is in control now with what we know what's happening in Egypt. They don't want to repeat. They don't want to be fooled by the words of Gaid Saleh praising the Algerians and their uprising. They don't want a change in the continuity of the same regime. They got rid of Bouteflika and they keep the same regime. They are not satisfied. They are not happy that Ben Salah, for example, well-known, well-hated figure of face of the regime continue as well. They don't want Bedoui. They don't want Bedoui, the prime minister, to continue as well, appointed by Bouteflika before his resignation. Bedoui was the interior minister accused of corruption, of rigging the elections, and of police brutality as well.
Amel Boubekeur, how would you gauge the mood in Algeria right now? I mean, we saw all the jubilant scenes the night before at the announcement that Bouteflika was resigning, but the protesters there have made it clear that this is about much more than one man. So how patient do you expect them to be about this?
Yeah, I believe Algerians are well beyond the obsession for a new strong man. It doesn't make sense to talk about elections, about bringing a new savior of the nation, even within the ranks of the army. And what is important, actually, in my opinion, that's what also the protesters have been demanding, it's to solve the leadership crisis that Algeria has been in actually since 1962 or 1963, and even more so with the arrival of Bouteflika in power in 1999. What does that mean? It means that in Algeria, you have a leadership that is very specific, that have a bicéphалous kind of functioning with the army and a kind of civilian facade that Bouteflika was incarnating until recently. And we need to solve this issue. One positive aspect of what happened these past 2 weeks is that the army has somehow, even if the army in chief didn't want to do so, it has clarified the role of the army. It's quite clear that the army is still manage the country and is still capable to make or to get rid of a politician or another. So this leadership crisis is very important also because actually that's something that was at the heart of Bouteflika's versus the army and the security service competition and it is transitional justice. You know that after the civil war, or the so-called civil war, there has been the promulgation of a charter for reconciliation, and this charter actually says that no one can criticize the security forces or the army for anything that they have done during the 90s and even after. So actually, this neutralization that took place between Bouteflika and the army, stating basically that be careful if you talk to me about crime, or I will talk to you about your corruption and the corruption of your family, etc., has ended today. But the question remains. So really, this crisis, this leadership crisis, is really at the heart of what will the institutions, the new institutions of Algeria be. And transitional justice, for example, Algerians have a very specific conception of transitional justice. They don't want to get retaliation. For example, the few businessmen that have been arrested by night without any kind of fair and true trials, this has been criticized by the Algerians. They are saying, well, we don't want the same kind of functioning. We want a true transitional justice with a real project of renewing the institutions. So this is really not with bringing a new strongman that all these questions, especially the leadership crisis, will be solved.
Dalia Ghanem, the protesters made it clear from the beginning that they want a clean break here. How confident or how skeptical, perhaps, are you that there will be this complete transition of power, democratic transition, and that we will see at some point elections that will reflect truly the will of the people?
Well, for now, Algerians have been, successful at achieving tangible objectives. The first one was no to the fifth term, and the second one was yesterday the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, but their demands remain unchanged. So they want not only the departure of Bouteflika, which they achieved, but they wanted the departure of Bouteflika's clan, Bouteflika's supporters, the old guard, Gaid Saleh, and they want the army to stop playing that important political role that it has been playing since the independence of the country in 1962. And as the slogan said it, and that became very famous, which means you will all be removed. So this is what Algerians are asking for. But I am afraid that, it is not a one-man show, as I wrote it in my New York Times piece. Behind the man, behind Bouteflika, there is a very complex and opaque system of power and structures of power. Behind Bouteflika, there is his clan, there is tribal and regional ties, there is the business elite, there is the military, there is the FLN apparatchik. It is a very complex and opaque circles of power. It is what is called le pouvoir, or the deep state. And it is very important to note that this deep state is very well rooted, and it will be very difficult to unroot it, if I may say. So this is the biggest challenge for Algerians next. So I think what the movement can do for now is to follow few steps. The first important step is for the movement to keep structured. The second step is for the movement to remain peaceful. It is very important. Algerians gave the world a very beautiful lesson of pacifism, and they need to continue in that in order, not to trigger any form of repression from the security forces. But the movement for now, I believe it needs to push for the removal of this government that has been appointed by President Bouteflika before his departure. Because according to the constitution now, he actually appointed people to pilot the transition. And this is what the movement should say no to. They should say no to Ben Saleh. They should say no to all those ministers who have been appointed yesterday by President Bouteflika, and they need to continue focusing on one demand, which is the removal of the regime. But again, let us be realistic about what can be achieved and what cannot be achieved. For the moment, it is true that the Algerian, thanks to this movement, had very tangible objectives and very great success, but the deep state will remain, I think, for a long time in Algeria.
Jamal ad-Din, there's been, people have talked about seeing what's happened in Algeria and the protests in Sudan as well, that this could trigger a kind of second Arab Spring, perhaps. Is it premature to be talking about that, or is there? Do you draw similarities between what we saw back in 2011 across the Middle East?
In this point in particular, we have to be cautious. Also, there is domestic factors and also foreign factors we have to take in consideration. There are counter-revolution, like it happens in the Arab Spring, forces who they don't want the Algerian peaceful revolution, democratic revolution, to achieve its goals, to the success of this uprising as well, as we have seen. And there are even there is speculations as well of the many visits of the chief of the staff to Emirates, for example. There is the role of Europe, of France in particular. And France in particular, which was backing Bouteflika at the beginning, clearly, and which led to many slogans, even personal slogans against Macron, against France. Now France, there is like a shift in the position of France. Now Algerians, the world can witness that Algerians, they took to the streets peacefully, even joyfully. It was like a carnival of democratic, all backgrounds of Algerians. And also, they don't want any interference from any parts of the world, from the western parts of the Arab states as well, that to stop Algerians achieving their dream. There are forces, yes, there are forces, domestic forces, who don't want change in Algeria, and there are also foreign forces. They will not be happy that this peaceful demonstration, because if Algerians achieve their main goal of regime change, I believe there will be repercussions on the Arab world. Those dictators in the Arab world are really afraid, are really in, they don't sleep actually maybe because of what's happening in Algeria. The Algerians took to the streets peacefully. They want a real change, democratic change. And I hope and I believe, and I have a deep belief that Algerians who took to the streets in this organized manner, in this peaceful manner, they are capable of achieving what they are aiming for, despite all the challenges, domestic challenges and outside challenges.
Amel, whoever is going to lead Algeria going forward is going to have to address the economic and social problems, many of which gave rise to those protests. Talk about some of that. I mean, I know Algeria is a big oil-producing country, and oil prices have fallen over the last couple of years, and that's contributed to a lot of this, the mood in the country right now. How challenging is it going to be for any leader to address all of that?
Well, as I mentioned, the leadership crisis in order to find a way forward, but there's also the political participation crisis. And I believe that all of these issues, like the improvement of the economic situation, as you know, Algeria is not a productive economy. So what kind of economy, what kind of political culture do we want? I think that all these issues will be solved also with the need to solve the political participation crisis. And actually, on the side of the people, people are quite clear about what they want. It's only the regime who has not made any kind of new proposition, a new offer, and who doesn't seem to have a plan B or a plan C in order to solve this political participation crisis. What do they want? They have stated it very clearly. They want a national transition with autonomous council that may be able to control and to supervise the government of transition that will be elected after national consultation and maybe after some kind of vote as well. They want a new constitution that will be...
that is going to have to be the last word. Thank you very much, Amel Boubekeur, Dalia Ghanem, and Jamaleddin Taleb. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you, as always, for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime. Just go to our website, aljazeera.com, and for more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hazem Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.